Open Window isn't even a minute long, yet it sits at the top of the ILL. How is this? What makes Open Window so hard? Hello there, my name is Crimson, I'm the creator of Open Window, and today I, as directed by those who know the level best, am going to be explaining exactly what makes the level tick. If you want a simple explanation for its position, the reason it's number 1 is that unlike Tax, where most of the difficulty is held in just a few parts, every single part of Open Window is extremely difficult, chock full of frame perfects and swifts everywhere. It's for this reason that, unlike the similar videos going over Cyc, Tax, and Formosa, I'm going to be in the editor directly pointing at things of note, rather than commentating over a showcase. So without further ado, let's begin. We begin in the intro, where I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over this first structure. First, I need to explain the concept of a swift click, that is, a press and release in a single frame. So for Open Window, that means you have to both press the button and release the button in less than a 6,000th of a second. Yikes. However, the term swift click is kind of a misnomer. It functions more as a 0-frame hold, as it is the release that's special, not the click itself. And branching off of this is the idea of stacked orbs. With multi-activate, an orb will be able to activate multiple times, obviously. However, it can only be activated once per frame, meaning that by clicking multiple times in a frame, you can effectively click through a multi-activate orb. I use the case with the blue-yellow because if the blue orb were to be multi-activate, you could press that and then on the same frame press the yellow orb, making it function effectively as a green orb, but you have to do 2 clicks on the same frame. Also, not all orb stacks are made equally. On the left, we have what is called a blocking double click, where on the right it is a non-blocking. This is because, for the one on the left, you have to both press the dash orb and then release it before clicking again, whereas for the setup on the right, you can just click 2 times without needing to release in between. This reaches its logical conclusion with something called a triple click, which is 3 clicks in a frame, which is the most that the ILL allows. And if a list is to not have a rule against this, usually becomes the meta. So to do the first jump in the level, you need to click not once, not twice, but thrice in a single frame with releases in between, just to get through both of the dash orbs. And not only that, if I turn on hitboxes and zoom in ever so closely, this spike is multiple spikes. This is something that I briefly covered in the Buffing Chord Massacre video, and it's a tactic to just ensure that each frame perfect is frame perfect-er. Speaking of frame perfects, there is no lacking of them in this first part. Already starting out, we have the triple click, which depending on how you rule it is 3 frame perfects or 5, depending on if you count the releases, and then we have this dash orb and the release for the dash orb making 2 more. Then there's another triple swift before getting into more lenient timings before arriving at the first toggle orb, which is another orb stack. There are going to be a lot of these. Then we have another triple dash orb where we get to the first rotated speed portal. Luckily this one isn't too difficult for now, before we get into the spam, which, once again, each spike is multiple spikes. Then we get into the ball part, which exits into some more rotated speed portals. Now the thing about the ball is that it's constantly rotating. And the thing about rotated hitboxes is you hit them with your rotated hitbox. So this ends up being a really nasty alignment. It can reportedly kill you as far forward as the third click of the swing copter. Then after that, some more tight timings, nothing too notable there. There's a breakable block teleport, which is pretty cool, into another triple click and another alignment that isn't that notable into another triple click. Now then, we arrive at the swift copter. This part doesn't have much to talk about as it's fairly homogeneous most of the way through. This stack of orbs is not multi-activate. It is only 25 orbs, which means that you can't cheese any of the swift clicks by just spamming through them. But on to all of these negative scaled saws, as provided by Ice Spirit. The ice saws are what make this part actually difficult. Especially notable is this small 5-click spam, because you have to get through it with a frame perfect swing right here, and then you leave with another frame perfect with 5 inputs that you just kind of have to figure out how to align with the velocity. And then there's this guy, because I was originally going to have each of these blocks be the hazards that you had to dodge, but then that idea fell through, and this bat at 3.75 times scale is a perfect block. Then there's this rotated teleportal, and then the funny dash orb afterwards. Fun fact, there's a bug in every single bot for 2.1, except for MHR and Echo, that delays rotation in practice mode by a single frame. And this slight difference in rotation is enough to hit the teleportal in such a way that this part becomes impossible. That was until a slightly alternate way of doing the part was found, involving actually using one of these dash orbs to move down a bit. However, TaskBot has yet to complete the level entirely. Who knows, maybe you could do it. It's for that reason that the phrase TaskBot died here is on this spike and is also crossed out. And now then here we see the first random dual split that was not present in the layout. I added quite a lot of these because I think they're really fun to see. This one sees, again, 2 wave double clicks. Then we get a couple more timings, which, need I say it every single time, each of these spikes is quite a couple of spikes. Then while transitioning into the wave part, we have another rotated speed portal, because at this point, why not? And then this blue orb. This is as good a time as any to talk about the differences in the corners that waves can have. First there's the normal corner, which is just either a press or a release to change which direction you're going. Then there's the blue orb, which allows you to hold as soon as you intersect the hitbox, and then you can release whenever the timing window is available. Then there's the pink dash orb, which largely power creeps the blue orb, as you can hold it for less time. But the thing about this blue orb is that it's so small you can only intersect it for 1 frame before the timing becomes impossible. And as such, it doesn't matter that it's technically not the optimal orb to put here, as you're going to be dead if you don't swift either way. Next up we have the wave, which is the easiest part to bot because it is incredibly straightforward, just being these silent circles-esque timings. However, equating them to silent circles isn't entirely accurate, as silent circles features 1 small space between the spikes, open window has 1 mini space, so it's a slight bit tighter. And in addition, the fixed hitboxes in the corners make pretty much everything frame perfect in this. Are you beginning to see the trend? There are also these little toggle orbs that appear. They don't do much. It's either a swift or an unswift, that being a swift release and then a click. If you were to press on these toggle orbs, then you just die instantly, and these blue orbs don't do anything. And then the second half of this wave, which is way more complicated and has a lot more to talk about. First is going to be a good time to mention the primary difference between open window waves and pretty much every other wave you're going to see on the list. The main difference being, most minus waves just have a hard gap copy and pasted everywhere, so when you hit a portal you have to immediately toggle your input as fast as possible, whereas open window, where each gap is individually as tight as it can be. So it isn't that you have to release as soon as possible in the setup, it's that you still have to be holding for X amount of frames. That is something that is consistent throughout the entire wave part. If that wasn't enough, there are a bunch of these dash orbs. Some of them are triple clicks, some of them are just double clicks, and some of these wonderful pink dash orbs you have to swift, and some of them you have to hold for a single frame or 2. This is also one of the main parts to have been reworked when the ILL started allowing 16 clicks per second in levels. The blue part is probably the easiest in the entire level, and there's not much to go over, except for this collection of negative scaled objects. This wave part, which is reportedly pretty difficult to align just because there's not much to work with, and the robot release into this half-speed portal, which is necessary to make this wave part doable. Chord Massacre is the 4th major part in open window, and for a level on 6000 FPS, it sure has a lot of frame perfects. In fact, that's much of what this part is, just a bunch of really tight timings, so there's not much to go over. There's of course the fair share of rotated speed portals. It was said that this strain in particular was pretty hard to bot because there's just so many different ways to hit this red pad so that you end up launching through these spikes, which is really tight. And then the part ends with not just 1, but 2 rotated speed portals, which, for what's coming up next, is not something you want to have happening. And this part acts as kind of a microcosm for open window's difficulty as a whole, where it's just a bunch of really tight timings coming at you really fast. Next is the drop, but before I talk about this, I need to talk about the transition into the drop. After you hit the dual portal, and before the top player enters this spam, you slide along the top of the ceiling as it moves up. This sliding is affected by both the X pose and the Y pose, and ties the alignment of this first part of the spam to not only these 3 blue orbs with nothing to go off of, and not only these 2 speed portals, but pretty much the entire level beforehand. And it can reportedly kill you as far forward as the wave part. Looking back at my notes, Fipan was 0.008 units off and died. For context, one of these grid blocks is 30 units. but for the gameplay of the drop itself is pretty much what you'd expect. Super tight ship gap with a bunch of orbs in them that you can't click on, and super precise wave spam. There are a bunch of toggle triggers and you click some of them and you don't click some of them. Then there's the aforementioned really tight wave, which is a really tight wave. But there are also a bunch of D blocks here because I didn't want it to go over CPS for the upcoming spam, but then they raised the CPS limit. And also this wasn't close to the CPS limit. And then we have the funny spam part, which was made precisely with an auto clicker set to 15 CPS, and then they raised the CPS limit. There was a bit of a funny scenario when I was building this when this portal kept misaligning randomly and it turned out it was because of smooth ease. All my homies hate smooth ease. And after that, we return to fairly normal gameplay. There's a bunch of really tight timings, there's a dual split, there's another rotated speed portal, and the second half of the drop is pretty much just normal gameplay. And then the finale of the sunset part is more of the same. Wave with a bunch of stacked orbs, orb timings with funky alignments, swift copter. This black orb UFO thing looks scary because it is a trip, but it is only one click. And then there's just more really tight timings. There's a cameo for one of these Formosa orbs, making this wave part pretty difficult. And while I'm here, I might as well talk about this dash orb, which I considered flipping, but because that affects the rotation of the robot, it ended up making this portal not align. That's how tight this level is. You can't rotate the dash orbs differently. Then to close the level out, we have a spider duel, which is more confusing than it is difficult. We have this, which was made to poke fun at that one part in the Tax Evasion explained video. And then this rush to the end part. And that is Open Window, the result of the two-step process of maximizing the amount of clicks and then making each of those clicks as precise as they can be. I'm going to reiterate here that what I've highlighted is not the entirety of the level's difficulty. Every part of the level is really hard. Also going to clarify this, there was never an unbuffed version of Open Window, as I was buffing it while I was decorating it, so there was only ever an unfinished version. And also this is by no means the limit of difficulty on the ILL. And that's important to know because, speaking more as myself, Open Window probably shouldn't be number one. Don't get me wrong, it's harder than everything else on the list, but there are so many things that aren't on the list. Midnight and Nematode are the first two that come to mind, but there were so many other projects started in 2023 that ended up never being finished. And it's kind of strange to be on the other side of the race to defeat CYC with Open Window. In my opinion, Open Window works infinitely better as a top 5 than a top 1, and that is going to fix itself inevitably as people make more levels, but there will eternally be a stain on its legacy with the former top 1 tag. So with all that said, thank you for watching. I hope you understand Open Window a little bit better now, and also sorry this took several months to make, I have been very busy. So like and subscribe, and farewell for now.